Greetings fellow nerds, I'm MattG, and welcome to the second episode of Gamer's Guides, where I'm basically going to be talking about writing exercises, how to write, and my experiences with writing. First off, I'd like to basically declare, for all legal and dickish purposes, I'm not a professional or published writer. I'm just a guy who, I've done a lot with writing, so I'm just trying to share my experience. So none of this is like legal jargon or any crap like that. It's literally just me and my experiences with writing up to this point. Now, for this particular episode, I'm going to be talking to you about workshopping. Now, for those of you who don't know what workshopping is, or have basically just stepped into the writing environment, workshopping is basically where you take your writing and you basically deliver it to a group of people who hopefully are like-minded in the writing sort of industry. You basically read it to them, hopefully without interruptions, and they then give you feedback on what it is that you're writing about. Now, I have gone through about 4 different types of different workshopping experiences, and I will be perfectly honest, none of them have worked out for me. Now, before you immediately click off this, I want to basically point out or explain what I did and why it didn't work, so that you guys can basically follow that experience and get it right the first time. Because I will tell you, not being able to do workshopping properly is really, really demoralizing for a writer, particularly if you're a discovery writer like me, where you're literally figuring out the story as you're going along. Alright, so step 1. Alright, so the best thing for you to do in terms of workshopping is do your research. Don't just simply find a random group of people who like meeting up in the pub every couple of weeks or so, and they need to be in the same sort of writing environment that you are. But it could be down to the type of genre that they're doing, the same sort of aspirations for writing, say if you want to get published or if you're just doing it as a hobby. But people who are also in the same age group as you generally tends to help. For younger writers, you'll find this more difficult simply because the industry just isn't really there for younger adults. If you're doing writing academically, if you're literally studying it at university or college or whatever, you'll have more success with doing this, because obviously the people in your class will be of your age group, hopefully, but also there'll be the sort of infrastructure in place where the people who are helping you and teaching you will be able to organise this for you. But if you're like me and you haven't actually engaged in writing in an academic capacity, then you're basically going to be finding these things online and through social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Gumtree, any of those. So always make sure that you do your research into who sort of attends these groups, how often they meet, and what their aspirations are. Obviously certain aspects of it will be a bit harder to find out, and in some cases you may only be able to find these things out by actually attending these writing groups. Now I'll give you the examples of why my particular writing groups and workshoppers weren't particularly helpful for me. But the first writing group that I attended was at my university. Now, I wasn't studying creative writing, but there were courses that you could have done that were for creative writing. I wanted to do them, but I didn't have the prerequisites for them. So I basically signed up with the freshman's group, and we basically met once, where it looked hopeful. There were about 20 people who turned up. All of them were hoping to write for a career purpose. Every single one of them was engaging in non-fiction, and they were also my age group. The downside of this group is that every single one of them, bar me, was already in the creative writing academic world. And the problem is that once they got started on their courses, they were immediately put into writing groups themselves. And so the writing group that I had signed up for just ended up being a group event where people would basically just go down the pub, get pissed, and just chill. There wasn't actually any but sort of workshopping involved or reading. It was literally just people just sitting around a table, playing games consoles in the sort of like freshman center, and that was literally it. So I only ended up attending 2 of these things. Now the second group that I attended, I found at my local college, and the main problem with that was that I was literally the only person who was under 50. Okay, so my writing received a lot of sort of ridicule simply because of that. A lot of people simply believed that I didn't belong there because I was a young adult, and but more importantly, nobody there was interested in publishing for a career purpose like I was. Everybody was simply writing poetry as a hobby, or writing memoirs, or just simply writing to keep themselves sane. Now, while all of those are really great, that didn't help me that much. I will say that attending this writing group did improve my my writing structures, because I was able to sort of get feedback from other people's work and basically apply that to my own stuff. But overall, workshopping didn't actually help in terms of my writing. And then the third group, which I apply to through the app Meetup, it is incredibly good app for things like this, so I do recommend you try it out. The only problem with the third group is that it was basically a smaller version of the second group. Literally the exact same people with the exact same sort of like writing needs and wants and career paths. So basically, get all of that together, do your research, and find this out. If you have friends who basically do writing, fiction, non-fiction, anything that sort of fits in with what you do, approach them and find out if they want to do a writing group before you start doing sort of things in the public arena. I will cover a bit in towards the end in regards to having friends in workshopping, but that's a good sort of point to sort of start with. Okay, so loads of people basically think that there's a common misconception that workshopping is basically there to help you write your books. Yeah, this is a good sort of idea to sort of cling to, but the problem is that if you do cling to this idea, you will basically meet a very shocking reality, because the point of workshopping isn't to help you make your book better, it is to tear your book and stories to pieces. Now, the main thing about workshopping is that people are not there to be your friends about writing. They are not there to cater to your ego, to give you a pat on the back, or to be convinced, or to help you convince yourself that you are a good writer. They are basically there to find out everything that's wrong about this piece of work that you've put in, to complain about it in every possible way, particularly if you're dealing with a sort of genre which they don't necessarily approve of, say like if you have adult content in it. And but they're basically not there to, shall we say, have a good time with workshopping. Now, I'll give you some more description into this. When somebody reads your book, most of the time, or the piece of work or chapter or whatever it is that you've put in, they are most likely going to be reading it out of context and not with a sort of base understanding of what the chapter is going to be about. This is particularly sort of there in cases where you've already done a book and you've picked out a chapter in the middle and you've then presented it to the group. they won't know all the backstory behind all the different characters, so they will basically just say, oh, character A seems to be a dick, I don't like that. Or character A seems to be too stereotypical. And they will basically just latch on to these concepts, regardless of whether or not you have explained these concepts earlier on in the book. But also, people aren't really there to give feedback in terms of, I like this, because it's really only people who really know how to workshop who will also give that sort of feedback. People are most likely to cling to the negatives more than they are the positives. And as I was basically saying, they don't understand the story in terms of a completed work. Not unless you are painstakingly going through chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter, and so basically explaining the book to the group as it's being written. Now, in my experience, I was basically writing, at the time, 2 chapters a week, so I was only able to do a reading so once every 3 weeks. So as you can imagine, there were some significant gaps in the content that I was doing. Now, there were some chapters which just came alive with some people, and they did actually say, oh, I really like that, but they didn't give me the reasons as to why they liked it. Or whenever I first presented my spy fiction, which was something that I've been working on for a better part of about 10 years, I basically put this out, but what I thought was the best chapter. They hated it, and hated it so much that they nearly chased me out of the course. So, the group rather. So, yeah, the purpose of workshopping is to effectively ruin your book, and basically for your book to survive this ruining process. If it does, it's a great book. If it doesn't, it needs work to become a great book. So approach workshopping like that, as opposed to, just make you feel better about it. I have tried workshopping with my friends in sort of one-off capacity, and people will, and if you're doing it with friends, they will try and do that. They will just simply say, oh yeah, it's good, I'm not going to tell you why, but it's good, I liked it, and I don't want there to be an argument about this. So this is why you need people who know how to workshop, so they can balance the negatives with the positives, which I'll quickly go into now. Okay, so if you are in a reading group and somebody is trying to workshop a piece with you, generally speaking, the most effective way for them is to basically just read the book to you, or the chapter or piece of work. I'll just call it a book for purposes of this video. So basically, somebody is reading their book to you, and the main problem that I had with reading my stuff is that I was a shit reader at the time that I was reading. Okay, so that was the main thing that loads of people latched onto, as opposed to the content, the fact that I was a shit reader. Fortunately, we had somebody at the time who worked with audiobooks at Oxford University, so he was more than willing to simply read through the stuff, but again, where character names were a bit difficult to pronounce, people were latching onto that instead of to the content. Now, say you're in a room and somebody's reading to you, the most damaging thing that you could possibly do to anybody is interrupt the reading. Okay? Do not do that. But obviously coughs and splutters will be a bit natural, but if you actively stand up and say, stop reading, I don't understand this, or I don't like that, that is the worst thing you can possibly do. So never interrupt the reading. Literally just, if you need to make notes on it, if you're worried about forgetting if the particular piece is too long, then do that, but otherwise, shut up. Okay, now, there's basically this two sides to how to workshopping. There's proscriptive, and then there's descriptive. Okay, you want to be proscriptive. Okay, now, but being proscriptive basically means you're saying things like, I didn't like this bit, and this is why. Okay, if being descriptive is basically just saying, I didn't like this bit, and that's the end of it. Okay? Now, in terms of being proscriptive, say like there's a romance scene and it seems a bit rushed, okay? Then you'll basically say, I didn't like the romance scene because it felt rushed. I think the rushedness of it started at this point, and that you could have drawn out the point before it a little bit more. Feedback like that is feedback as opposed to criticism. Criticism is descriptive. And people who are inexperienced in how to do workshopping, they will be descriptive, and they will be descriptive mercilessly. But there was the first time that I did my spy fiction. Basically, the scene was, but the spies are sort of meeting in their domestic capacity, and basically an idiotic event happens. Okay, and that was basically the scene that I read, and people basically latched on to the idiocy of it and said, this is complete, piece of crap. Like, why did you even consider reading it to us? We hate it. But we're here to have professional literature. Crap like that. Okay, they didn't say, I didn't like it because the idiocy was too much, but you could have tweaked it a little bit more to make it more serious or more comical. They just simply said, we don't like it. Okay, that is being descriptive. Now, this all ties into the next part about receiving feedback, but the main thing is to not have a go at the writer because they've done something that you don't like. The worst thing that you can do in workshopping, aside from interrupting, is trying to get the writer to defend their work. But they are not there to be told that they're good or bad. They are there to find out if they are good and bad in their own frame of mind. So, but never sort of ask the writer, to basically ask questions like, why did you do this? Are you trying to be offensive? Or anything like that. Obviously, give feedback if content is offensive, but bear in mind that your concept of being offended is not going to mirror the world at large, particularly if that writer is trying to make a career out of their writing. Okay. In regards to that, never try to provoke an argument. The purpose of being there is to give feedback on the writing, not to argue with the rest of the class and come out on top. Okay. In regards to positives and negatives, balance the two out. I always try to give one good for every negative. I liked the opening sequence of this chapter. I thought it sort of covered all the stops, but it was a bit of an info dump as well. See, there are certain points which you can bring out, but etc. etc. Okay. Now, in regards to the positives and negatives, particularly with negatives, learn to let go of the concepts that you've given out, because if you're dealing with a writer who is sort of giving you past work as opposed to their current work, it's going to take a while for them to sort of filter your feedback into their writing. So say if you basically say to them, I don't like this character because they're constantly using this curse and it's not original, then you can probably expect for the next 2 or 3 chapters that is going to remain a constant until the writer has time to basically go back and re-edit it, and normally that won't happen until the end of they finish writing the book, particularly if they're a discovery writer. So constantly bringing up the fact that you don't like a particular character because of how they talk or because of the chapter's sort of structure, that isn't going to be particularly helpful because you're just repeating the same concepts over and over and over again. And that was something that I had quite a lot of in my workshopping, where people were basically saying to these chapters that I was sort of giving out of context, we don't know what these characters are, so therefore it's okay for us not to understand them. Now, but I deliberately tried to challenge this feedback, and I gave the introductory chapters for a particular character as part of my workshopping. Basically, I'm basically saying this character is this, and this is why. This is the past events that led them to this, and this is the outcome. And I still got the exact same feedback from these people. So I learned to filter out that particular feedback and just not engage with it in any capacity. Now, that may have been wrong with me, because all feedback is valid, but in my opinion, it wasn't. So I was then able to sort of say, well, you haven't come up with any new feedback, so I'm starting to question whether or not you're actually listening to the reading. Okay? Now, obviously, that was pretty one-sided of me, but on my defense, it's a bit one-sided of them to just constantly give the same feedback over and over and over again. Okay? Now, let's move on to receiving the feedback. Okay, so just like when you want the people who are listening to your reading to not talk, you don't talk during receiving feedback, not unless you are asked a deliberate question. Okay? As I said, the best thing that you can do when receiving feedback is to not defend your work. They are not there to be convinced that you are a fantastic writer. They are not there to know that you have something to gain by writing. They know that you have something to gain by writing, that's why you're there. Okay, so the best thing you can do is just smile and nod, write down feedback, and I would say thank them for their feedback, but this ain't customer service, so you can say whatever the hell you want. You can just smile and nod, or give angry expressions or whatever, but above all, do not defend your work. Okay, because it will just turn into an argument about how good you are as a writer, and it won't do your work any favours. Now, if there's particular points that you don't receive feedback on, you can challenge the group to give you very direct feedback. Now, what I basically mean by this is say you've written out a piece of work and there's a particular piece of foreshadowing that you've put in for the next chapter, or you've brought a particular point to a conclusion and you want to know if it was registered or not. So you can basically ask, I did this point here, what do you think of that? I will emphasize that people in workshopping environments are not there to be swept away in the narrative. What they are there to do is to help you write about this. So people who basically shout out spoilers during workshopping, they just deserve a kick in the teeth. They are not there to listen to the story. They are not there to enjoy the narrative. They are there to help you tear the book apart to work out how to make it better. So chances are they are going to be hearing the same chapter over and over and over again. And by the time the book comes out, they will probably have memorized the entire thing. Okay? That being said, however, this is going to be a sample of your work, not the whole book. If you're workshopping your entire book, you're going to be there for years, months, whatever. So, yes, always take their feedback with a pinch of salt, particularly whenever they give you crap feedback, like, I don't understand this because I don't understand the character. Now, admittedly, that does have a certain validity, but think of it as that. They are ignorant of the descriptions of your book, so work with that. If you feel that you've done the chapter justice, or the character justice, and they still are giving this to you, consider adding more description to the character's behaviour and traits, but otherwise, simply leave it as it is. Now, this is a little bit deeper, shall we say, but when you give these books and all you receive is negative criticism, don't question your own capacity to be a writer. Okay? The fact that you have written a book, regardless of whether it is good or not, makes you a good writer. The fact that you've had the discipline to fulfill it to a conclusion, that makes you a good writer. So you don't need to be convinced that you are a good writer. You may need to be convinced that your content is good, but as for yourself, you are a good writer. Okay? So never question that because of negative criticism. I know it's easy to say and far harder to do. I've fallen into that pit myself, to the point that I've actually set aside my spy fiction nearly completely to work on my historical fiction and conspirators. But that is probably the worst thing you could possibly do, because you'll sink into a rut and possibly depression and mental illness, and that is the worst enemy of a professional writer, or any writer to be honest, is to basically consider themselves crap. Okay? In regards to that, if all you receive is negative feedback, the worst thing you could possibly do is basically say, okay, my book's shit, delete it and start again. Never do that. Okay? You can obviously go back and rewrite stuff, particularly if you're a discovery writer, but never ever just sweep the book aside, forget about it, and just say fuck it and leave it there. Okay? Now, in terms of sort of receiving feedback and applying it to your writing, the best thing you can possibly do, in my opinion, and I know that because this is the one thing that I didn't do in terms of my feedback, was basically just write down all the feedback, leave it to one side, and then once emotions have cooled down, make decisions on them later. Okay? But what I ended up doing with a lot of my feedback was basically take it write it down, immediately go into the writing setup that I have up, and basically just apply all the feedback, and then forget the reasons why I did it, because I was then moving on to the next. The best thing you can do is approach feedback in terms of rewriting your content, and do it with a completely cool head that isn't bogged down with the emotional feelings to the person who gave you that feedback, or sort of criticism, or any sort of emotional standpoints that you might have in regards to what you're changing. Alright guys, so that's basically the end of this, shall we say, seminar or webinar on workshopping. I'm going to be doing hopefully quite a few of these in the next while. Let me know in the comments if you preferred this version, or whether you prefer the more video orientated version that I did with my gamer's guide on elves. Next time I'm going to be working on either plot descriptions or world building, so let me know in the comments down below as to which one you would like first, and I'll see you next time.